Microsoft Azure Storage Account is used as enterprise-class cloud-based storage. So storage for many different types of data that we'll discuss here that can be stored in the cloud environment. So a storage account then is its own cloud resource. Now you could have more than one storage account. For instance, when you deploy a storage account, you deploy it into a subscription, a resource group, and of course into a region or a location, such as West Europe or East US. The idea being that we could have multiple storage accounts in different regions used for different purposes or to facilitate local access in that region. And as is the case with managing any Azure type of resource, it can be managed using the portal, programmatically through the REST API or through PowerShell or using the CLI. Now within an Azure storage account, you have the option of storing 4 different types of things, one of them being binary large objects or blobs. Essentially, a blob is just a file that you can upload and have stored in the cloud. The second type of item you can store within a storage account is a file share. In other words, a shared folder, the same way that we would have done this on premises over the decades, where we could have clients that could make a connection to that shared folder and access those files from a central file server. That could be done through a drive mapping or through a mount point. The third type of item in a storage account you could potentially store is a queue. You can create one or more queues in a storage account for software components to communicate messages amongst one another. And finally, the last type of thing you can store in a storage account are tables. These are basic key value pair tables that are designed to be manipulated programmatically. Now, a single storage account can accommodate all of these things at once or any combination thereof. And as you might guess, there are roles where you can assign permissions related to each of these 4 types of items for granular management of the contents of a storage account. A storage account blob or binary large object, as we know, is just cloud-based file storage. What you can do is you can create blob containers to organize the blobs within a storage account, the same way you would create folders on a disk to organize files that are related. You can also automate lifecycle management, meaning after a period of time has gone by, you can determine that perhaps older blobs might be put in the archive tier, so they're stored as archives. By default, blobs are not available anonymously. In other words, you have to authenticate to a storage account, maybe through an Azure AD sign-in, perhaps using a storage account access key, or even a shared access signature, all of which we'll talk about in detail later. But if you do have a need to allow anonymous access, you can enable blob public access, such as for a public-facing website with product brochures that anybody should be able to access without signing in. You can enable versioning for blobs, so when you make a write to a blob, it creates a new version. You can also create snapshots, where a snapshot is a point-in-time picture of a blob. The difference really being that versioning is automatic and snapshots are created manually by you. You can enable soft deletion, so that deleted blobs are retained for a default of 7 days, after which they're purged permanently. And there are 3 types of blobs, the first being a block blob. This is a standard file type that you would use if you're uploading spreadsheets or word processor documents, that type of thing. A page blob is designed for large files that have random reads and writes throughout the file content, such as for virtual hard disks. And finally, we have an append blob, which is designed when you need to keep adding to the end of a file, such as is the case with log files. Within a storage account, we've mentioned that we can create shared folders. So this allows shared folder access from machines that are either on premises or machines that are in the cloud, virtual machines, and the connection from a Windows host would be over TCP port 445. That's the SMB or server message block port. So client devices making this connection to a Windows shared folder need to support at least SMB version 3.0. Of course, other than mapping a drive letter from Windows and Linux hosts, we can also create mount points. In other words, a local folder that's mounted to the remote share so that the contents appear to be in the local file system. Storage account can contain 1 or more queues. This is of primary interest to software developers. In our diagram on the left, we have an app component called app component 1, and on the right, another one called app component 2. In this example, app component 1 can drop a message in the queue that is destined for app component 2. And so App Component 2 doesn't have to be up and running, but when it is available and up and running, it can read that message from App Component 1 from the queue. Storage Account supports basic tables. These are NoSQL based, so therefore it's an unstructured schema. We're not talking about a SQL compliant type of data structure. We're talking basic key and value pairs. Now, storage accounts also have numerous different types of settings that you would tweak and configure based on your needs, such as using access keys as an alternative way to access the contents of a storage account, or using a shared access signature, a SAS, which gives limited access to a subset of content within a storage account, enabling encryption using a customer-managed key, and also enabling geo-replication so that you've got a copy of data from a storage account in a separate region in case the primary region is inaccessible. So it's important to plan out how you're going to use storage accounts, the number of storage accounts you will have, the regions they'll be located in, and how they will be configured.